long before our recorded history, in an age we can now only glimpse through the mists of time and ancient texts, there existed a world teeming with life and remarkable complexity. This was the antediluvian world, the civilization that flourished before the Great Flood. It was not a primitive landscape of scattered, struggling tribes. Instead, it was a society that had already mastered the art of building cities. The very first of these, the city of Enoch, was founded by Cain. This was not merely a collection of huts, but a structured urban center, a testament to humanity's early drive to create, organize, and build a world for itself. These cities became hubs of activity, with bustling markets and intricate trade routes that connected distant communities, laying the groundwork for a complex and interconnected global society. Imagine standing on a hill overlooking one of these nascent metropolises. You would see not chaos, but order. There was a clear division of labor, with individuals specializing in different crafts and trades. This specialization allowed for a level of sophistication that is often underestimated. People were not simply surviving, they were thriving and innovating, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The very existence of cities like Enoch indicates a society that had moved beyond mere subsistence. They had developed systems of governance, social structures, and an economy that supported a growing population. This was a world brimming with potential, a vibrant and dynamic civilization that was, in many ways, laying the very foundations of human culture as we would come to know it. The social fabric of this early world was woven with threads of family, clan, and community. People lived long lives, far longer than we do today, which allowed for the accumulation and transmission of vast amounts of knowledge from one generation to the next. This extended lifespan meant that great-grandparents could share their wisdom directly with their descendants, creating a continuity of culture and skill that fueled rapid development. The world was younger then, the earth itself perhaps more fertile and forgiving. It was against this backdrop of immense vitality and burgeoning human ingenuity that the first great chapter of our shared story unfolded, a chapter that would ultimately lead to both astonishing achievements and a catastrophic end. However, even in these early days, the seeds of conflict were present. The very first city was founded by a man marked by violence, a detail that hints at the underlying tensions within this burgeoning civilization. While society progressed on the surface with its impressive structures and organized systems, a deeper current of human nature was also at play. The drive to build and create coexisted with the potential for jealousy, ambition, and strife. This duality would come to define the antediluvian age, a period of brilliant light that was destined to cast a very long and dark shadow across the annals of time. A shadow that would eventually grow to consume the world itself. The technological and cultural achievements of the antediluvian world were truly extraordinary, far surpassing the primitive image often associated with early humanity. One of the most significant advancements was in the field of metallurgy. A man named Tubal-Cain is described as a master craftsman, an instructor of every artisan in bronze and iron. This was not simple blacksmithing. To work with these metals requires a profound understanding of chemistry and physics. It necessitates the construction of high-temperature furnaces, the knowledge of how to extract ore, and the precise techniques for smelting and casting. The creation of tools and implements from both bronze and iron points to a society that had unlocked the secrets of the earth and bent its very elements to their will, creating a true industrial foundation. Alongside this burgeoning industry, the arts flourished with a remarkable degree of refinement. We hear of Jubal, who is called the father of all who play the harp and flute. These were not simple rustic pipes, but sophisticated musical instruments. To construct a harp that can produce harmonious melodies requires incredible precision. It demands an understanding of acoustic resonance, the physics of string tension, and the mathematical relationships between notes. The existence of such instruments suggests a culture that valued beauty, creativity, and intellectual pursuits. Music was an integral part of their daily lives, a means of expression and celebration that added a rich layer of cultural depth to their advanced society. The management of the natural world also saw incredible organization. Jubal is known as the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. This description points to more than just a few scattered shepherds. It suggests the development of large-scale, organized animal husbandry. This would have involved sophisticated practices such as selective breeding to improve stock, the management of vast herds for meat, milk, and textiles, and the establishment of trade networks to distribute these resources. Such a system required immense logistical planning and a deep understanding of animal biology and behavior, transforming the relationship between humans and the animal kingdom into a structured and economically vital enterprise. When one considers these achievements together, advanced metallurgy, refined musical arts, and organized agriculture, a picture emerges of a civilization that was anything but primitive. These were people with a deep intellectual curiosity and a powerful drive to innovate. The construction of Noah's Ark itself, a project of immense scale, relied on this pre-existing knowledge. It required advanced principles of naval engineering, hydrodynamics for stability, and structural integrity to withstand a global cataclysm. The instruction to use pitch, a petroleum derivative, for waterproofing indicates a practical knowledge of natural chemistry. This was a world of thinkers, builders, and artists, a society that had reached a pinnacle of human achievement. Despite its brilliant technological and cultural advancements, a dark and pervasive sickness began to fester within the heart of the antediluvian world. The ancient records are stark and unambiguous, stating that the earth had become corrupt in the sight of God and was filled with violence. This was not the occasional crime or isolated conflict that we might see in any society. Instead, it was a deep systemic corruption that had poisoned the very fabric of their existence. Violence became the default language of power and interaction. It was a routine and inescapable part of daily life, where strength dictated right and the vulnerable had no recourse. The moral compass of humanity had been shattered, and its pieces were scattered in the winds of chaos. This corruption was not confined to a single class or region. It spread like a virulent plague through every level of society, from the highest echelons of power to the common person on the street. The very thoughts and intentions of the human heart had turned towards wickedness. Every imagination, every plan, and every desire was, as the texts describe, only evil continually. It's a staggering thought, a world where goodness and compassion had become so rare as to be almost extinct. Empathy was replaced by cruelty, and justice was subverted by brute force. The social bonds that held their cities and communities together began to fray and then tear apart under the relentless strain of this moral decay. The frenetic markets that were once centers of trade and prosperity likely became arenas of extortion and deceit. The trade routes that connected cities may have become perilous paths, haunted by bandits and warlords. The division of labor, which had enabled such progress, could have been twisted into a rigid caste system where the powerful exploited the weak. The very innovations that had promised a brighter future, the strong metal tools and weapons, were now turned towards acts of aggression and oppression. The world that humanity had built with its own ingenuity was now being systematically dismantled by its own wickedness, piece by painful piece. This descent into chaos was a profound tragedy. Here was a civilization blessed with long life, immense knowledge, and dominion over the natural world, yet it chose a path of self-destruction. The potential for a golden age of peace and discovery was squandered in a relentless pursuit of power, greed, and gratification. The vibrant energy that had once been channeled into building cities and composing music was now fueling a cycle of violence that spiraled ever further out of control. The earth itself seemed to groan under the weight of this corruption, and it became clear that such a state of affairs could not continue indefinitely. A reckoning was inevitable. At the heart of this spiraling corruption and violence was the emergence of a mysterious and formidable group known as the Nephilim. The ancient texts speak of them in Genesis chapter 6, noting that there were giants on the earth in those days. The Hebrew word Nephilim itself carries a powerful connotation, often translated as the fallen ones, or perhaps more accurately, those who cause others to fall. This suggests their impact was not merely about their physical stature, but about their profound and destructive moral influence. They were a catalyst for the world's decline, accelerating its descent into chaos and dragging humanity down with them into a state of spiritual and ethical ruin. These Nephilim are described as mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. This indicates they were not outcasts, but a celebrated and feared ruling class. They were the charismatic leaders, the indomitable warriors, and the powerful figures who shaped the corrupt social order of the day. Their fame was likely built on conquest, intimidation, and a ruthless exercise of power. They were the heroes of a violent age, their renown stemming from their ability to dominate and control others. Their presence fundamentally altered the balance of society, creating a world where might made right and where true justice had no voice against their overwhelming strength and influence. The origin of the Nephilim is a subject of much debate, arising from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men. Some interpretations suggest this refers to the intermingling of two human lineages, the faithful line of Seth who walked with God, and the estranged, worldly line of Cain. In this view, the sons of God abandoned their spiritual heritage for worldly pursuits, leading to a corrupt generation. Another more dramatic interpretation posits that the sons of God were angelic beings who transgressed their divine boundaries to join with human women, producing this hybrid race of powerful and fearsome offspring. Regardless of their precise origin, the result was catastrophic. The presence and influence of the Nephilim are directly linked in the narrative to the exponential multiplication of evil on the earth. As their power and numbers grew, so did the wickedness of humanity. They were the embodiment of humanity's rebellion and corruption, a living symbol of a world that had turned its back on its creator. Their existence represented the ultimate breakdown of the established order, a perversion of nature that mirrored the perversion in the hearts of men. It was their influence that pushed society past a point of no return, sealing its dark and watery fate. Observing this world, a world he had created to be full of life and goodness, brought a profound sense of grief to its creator. The ancient narrative uses strikingly human language to describe a divine sorrow, stating that God regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. This was not the anger of a distant, unfeeling deity, but the deep pain of a father witnessing his children embrace self-destruction. The constant wickedness, the unending violence, and the utter corruption had become an unbearable stain upon the beauty of creation. It was a lament for what was lost, the innocence, the potential, and the relationship that was meant to be. Faced with a world that was irredeemably corrupt, a divine decision was made. However, this was not a snap judgment born of anger. It was a measured and solemn decree. God declared that his spirit would not contend with humanity forever, and he set a specific time frame, 120 years. This was not a deadline for destruction, but a period of grace. It was a century-long opportunity for humanity to see the error of its ways, to turn back from the path of violence, and to seek repentance. This extended period of warning demonstrates a divine patience, a final outstretched hand offered to a world that was determined to pull away. Amidst this pervasive wickedness, one man stood apart. His name was Noah. He is described in simple but powerful terms as a righteous man, blameless in his generation. This does not mean he was perfect, but that in a world where everyone else had turned away, he remained faithful. He was a man who, in the face of overwhelming societal pressure, walked with God. He maintained his integrity and his moral compass when the rest of the world had lost its own. It was this steadfast righteousness that set him apart and made him the sole recipient of God's plan for salvation, a single point of light in an otherwise suffocating darkness. It was to this man, Noah, that the solemn warning was delivered. He was told of the coming judgment, a great flood that would wipe the slate of creation clean. The instructions were specific and monumental. God was not only announcing the end of that world, but was also providing the means of escape for Noah, his family, and for the animal kingdom. This was a message of both devastating judgment and incredible mercy. While the world continued its descent, unaware and uncaring, Noah was entrusted with a divine secret and a task of unimaginable proportions, becoming the hinge upon which the future of all life on earth would turn. The task given to Noah was nothing short of colossal. He was to build an ark. This was not to be a simple boat, but a vessel of truly epic proportions, designed to withstand a global cataclysm and preserve the future of life on Earth. The dimensions given were precise and staggering: 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. In modern measurements, this translates to a vessel approximately 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet tall. It was to be a massive three-story floating sanctuary, meticulously crafted from gopher wood and waterproofed inside and out with pitch, a natural tar. The sheer scale of the project was a testament to the magnitude of the coming flood. The construction of the Ark was not a secret affair conducted in some hidden valley. It was a public and highly visible act that would have taken decades to complete. Imagine the scene. Day after day, year after year, Noah and his sons toiled, felling trees, shaping timber, and assembling this immense structure on dry land, far from any significant body of water. To the people of that time, it must have seemed like the ultimate act of folly. They would have watched this family laboring on their bizarre project, likely subjecting them to constant ridicule, scorn, and mockery. Why build such a gigantic box when there wasn't a cloud in the sky? Yet the Ark was more than just a construction project, it was a living sermon. While Noah's hands were busy building, his voice was not silent. The Apostle Peter later refers to him as a preacher of righteousness. For the entire duration of the Ark's construction, likely spanning many decades within that 120-year window, Noah verbally warned his contemporaries. He would have spoken of the corruption that filled the land, of the grief of God, and of the coming judgment by water. The Ark itself stood as a silent wooden witness to his words, a tangible symbol of the impending doom and the only offered path to salvation. Despite the monumental visual evidence and the persistent verbal warnings, society remained indifferent. The ancient texts note that in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage right up until the day Noah entered the Ark. They simply continued with the routines of daily life, completely absorbed in their own affairs and blinded by their own arrogance. They heard the warnings but did not listen. They saw the Ark but did not understand. The message of repentance fell on deaf ears, and the greatest engineering project of the age was dismissed as the obsession of a mad old man. As the decades of construction drew to a close and the colossal Ark stood complete, the final phase of the divine plan began. A specific final warning was issued. There were only 7 days remaining before the flood would begin. In this last week, something extraordinary and undeniable occurred. From all corners of the land, animals began to arrive at the Ark. They came not in a panicked stampede, but peacefully and in an orderly fashion. They came in pairs, male and female, and of the clean animals, they came in sevens. This was not a process of Noah frantically rounding them up. It was a supernatural gathering, a clear and final divine sign that the time of judgment was at hand. The sight of this great procession of creatures, from the largest land mammals to the smallest creeping things, all moving with a shared, peaceful purpose toward the Ark, must have been a spectacle of breathtaking wonder and honestly terror. For the people who had mocked Noah for so long, this would have been the ultimate irrefutable proof that his warnings were true. Here was a miracle unfolding before their very eyes, a final, silent plea for them to reconsider and seek safety. Yet, even in the face of this astonishing event, their hearts remained hardened. They watched the animals enter the vessel, 2 by 2, and still they did not move to join them. On the appointed day, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons and their wives, a total of 8 people, followed the last of the animals into the cavernous interior of the Ark. They brought with them the provisions needed for the long journey ahead, trusting in the promise that had guided them for so long. They were the last remnants of a faithful line, the sole human survivors-to-be of a world that had chosen its own destruction. As they crossed the threshold, they were not just entering a wooden vessel, they were stepping through a doorway between 2 worlds, the world that was and the world that would be. Then, in a final, solemn act that sealed the fate of everyone inside and outside, the great door of the Ark was shut. The text makes a point of saying that it was not Noah who closed it, but that the Lord shut him in. This was a divine act, signifying that the period of grace was officially over. The opportunity for repentance had passed. For those inside, it was the seal of their protection and salvation. For the multitudes outside, it was the closing of their last hope. The world fell silent for a moment, the laughter and mockery of the onlookers perhaps fading into a new and dawning sense of dread as they stared at the sealed vessel. The cataclysm began on a precise date recorded for posterity, the 17th day of the second month of the 600th year of Noah's life. The end did not come quietly. The narrative describes a twofold assault of water that unleashed a power the world had never before witnessed. Simultaneously, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth and the windows of heaven were opened. This was not merely a rainstorm, it was a geological and atmospheric catastrophe of unimaginable scale. Water erupted from vast subterranean reservoirs deep within the Earth's crust, while from above a torrential downpour began, a relentless deluge that would continue unabated for 40 days and 40 nights. The combined force of the water from below and the rain from above was overwhelming. Rivers swelled and burst their banks, valleys filled and plains turned into churning inland seas. The waters rose with terrifying speed, relentlessly consuming everything in their path. The cities that were once hubs of innovation and culture were inundated, their streets turning into violent rapids that swept away buildings and people alike. The cries of those who had scoffed and mocked would have turned to screams of terror as the waters relentlessly climbed, offering no escape. The highest hills and then the mightiest mountains became fleeting islands of refuge, crowded with panicked people and animals before they too were submerged by the rising tide. Inside the ark, Noah and his family would have been tossed on the violent waves, surrounded by the roaring sound of the deluge. They were completely at the mercy of the storm, their massive vessel the only point of stability in a world that was being torn apart. For 150 days, the waters prevailed upon the earth, covering the entire globe. Every land-based, air-breathing creature that was not aboard the ark perished. All of humanity, with its advanced cities, its complex culture, its mighty Nephilim, and its pervasive violence, was wiped from the face of the planet. The world was returned to a state of watery chaos, reminiscent of its primordial form before land first appeared. This great flood was an act of decreation, a terrible and necessary cleansing. The earth, which had been stained by unending violence and corruption, was being washed clean. It was a catastrophic judgment, but it was also a profound act of renewal. By removing the source of the corruption, it made a new beginning possible. In the midst of this total destruction, the ark floated as a vessel of hope. It was a genetic bottleneck, a floating sanctuary carrying the precious cargo of 8 human souls and the animal pairs from which a new world could be repopulated. It was the ultimate testament to the idea that even in the face of overwhelming judgment, a seed of new life is preserved. After many long months, the waters of the great flood began to recede. The relentless rains had stopped, and the fountains of the deep were closed. A wind passed over the earth, and slowly, painstakingly, the water levels began to drop. The ark, which had been tossed on a boundless ocean, finally came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. The long, dark voyage was over. After a period of waiting, sending out a raven and then a dove to test for dry land, Noah finally received the sign he was waiting for. A dove returned with a freshly plucked olive leaf, a symbol of new life and a sign that the earth was beginning to heal itself. When the command finally came to leave the vessel, Noah and his family stepped out of the ark's confines and onto a world that was utterly transformed. The air was clean, the sky was clear, and the earth was silent. Gone were the bustling cities, the violent crowds, and the clamor of the old civilization. Everything was new, washed clean by the floodwaters. They stood as the sole inheritors of an entire planet, the 8 human survivors tasked with beginning the story of humanity all over again. Before them lay a pristine, empty landscape, a blank canvas upon which a new world would be painted. It must have been an overwhelming moment, a mixture of profound relief, deep sorrow for the world that was lost, and the daunting weight of the future. Noah's very first act on this new earth was not to build a shelter or to plant a field, but to build an altar. He gathered some of the clean animals that had been preserved on the ark and offered a sacrifice of thanksgiving to God. This was a powerful and symbolic act of worship. It was an acknowledgement that their survival was not due to their own strength or the seaworthiness of their vessel, but entirely due to divine mercy and grace. This act of worship set the tone for the new world, re-establishing the relationship between humanity and its creator as the foundational principle of this new beginning. In response to this act of faith, God made a covenant, a solemn promise to Noah and to all of creation. He promised that he would never again destroy the earth with a flood of water. As a sign of this everlasting covenant, he set a rainbow in the clouds. From that day forward, the rainbow would serve as a beautiful and constant reminder of both the terrible judgment that had passed and the merciful promise of a new future. The story of the antediluvian world thus concludes not just with destruction, but with hope, a new covenant, and the beginning of the world we know today.